All right, so let's begin with the Angular 2 Upgrade webinar. Thank you for joining. First, we'd like to kind of give a background about Intersys and our capabilities. So I'm going to go ahead and pass this over to Jason Grimm, our GM out of the Phoenix office, and he'll cover the Intersys background and our capabilities.
Thanks, Travis. Sorry about the delay there. I was dealing with some phone issues, but good to be on now. Thank you for the time to introduce Intersys. And while we're allowing a couple more people to join, I'll just spend a minute or two introducing the company and who we are and what we do. Then I'll hand it over to our speakers to deliver the content that we're all looking forward to hearing today. So Intersys is a national IT consulting firm, staffing firm and subscription services firm based out of Austin, Texas. We have regional offices in Phoenix and New York City, and around 150 or more IT consultants delivering projects and solutions across the U.S. We do have offshore development capabilities in India and also building out a global delivery center in Mexico at the moment. And we provide services really across the full IT space, leveraging our consulting, staffing, and subscription services solutions. And let's go ahead and jump to the next slide. I'll talk a little bit about our regional model. We've got regions based out of Phoenix, Austin, and New York, as I mentioned, and that covers West, Central, and East. But our clients are scattered around the United States, and we deliver either with our consulting workforce traveling to those locations or providing support through our subscription services capability or staffing capabilities. And finally, I want to talk a little bit about our core practice capabilities. As a consulting firm, we really think of our practice as covering two high-level practice areas, one being big data and analytics, so everything sort of in the data and analytics spectrum, things like the big data ecosystem with Cloudera, MapR, and Hortonworks, analytics and data science, enterprise search, business intelligence, and traditional information management, things like Oracle and SQL Server and ETL development, etc. And finally, our application services practice that you'll hear from today, which covers custom development, front-end engineering, things like Angular and React, etc., agile transformation, cloud mobility, and DevOps. And another core capability of Intersys is really around technology staffing. So whether it comes to the skill sets that I mentioned inside of our practice or something outside of those skill sets just in the broader spectrum of IT, for instance, infrastructure, etc., we can bring our staffing capability to the table to help find contract resources, contract to hire, or direct hire resources. And without further ado, I want to turn it back to our talented application services team. I think first to Travis Rogers, our Director of Application Services for the West, to take us through the content today. Thank you.
Thanks, Jason. Let's go ahead and begin. So today we're going to cover the key benefits of upgrading to Angular 2. What are the migration paths from going from AngularJS 1x to Angular 2? And what are the pros and cons to consider for each migration path? And also some of the tools that are available to help with that process. So before I begin, there was a change to the versioning of Angular. They're no longer calling the next version of Angular Angular 2. The Google team has decided to label all new versions of Angular just Angular without a version number. We'll talk more about this versioning change a little further into the webinar, but for this presentation we'll continue to refer to the next version of Angular as Angular 2. We wanted to cover some of the key benefits of upgrading to the next version of Angular from Angular 1x, and this discussion would help with the decision making on when to upgrade. So let's take a look. So first, Angular 2 has a modern architecture with components, and components are used throughout Angular 2 and are a crucial building block to any Angular 2 application. Observables brings a new programming approach to Angular 2 and are often used to replace promises. TypeScript is Angular 2 was built with that. Whether you love it or hate it, TypeScript is used extensively in Angular 2. And then a big change was the render application logic separation. This change is important as one of the primary architecture changes that requires an Angular 2 upgrade. It is essential for cross-platform development. And then with cross-platform development, development just got a whole lot easier with Angular 2. You can build cross-platform native applications for mobile and desktop using something like Electron or native script. And then Angular CLI is another improvement with Angular 2. It's an efficiency improvement that allows you to create projects, generate code and files, and run processes from the command line. This functionality allows developers to quickly complete tasks and processes that would take minutes that can be done now in seconds. And there are also some speed and performance updates. So the concept of code splitting, only loading the required code to run a view. Also improving the initial load time using isomorphic server rendering, which allows applications to load in like 200 milliseconds, which is great for SEO. So let's go ahead and take a look at these benefits a little bit more in detail. So with components, I put a quote in here from Todd Motto. He's part of the Angular team. I just want to mention that, which is gone are the days of actually creating HTML structures and pages. What are those? The web is becoming all about components, and those components are completely up to us thanks to web components. And this was back in 2014. So I've put an example component class and component file structure just to give you a feel of what the code looks like. But again, they're the major building block. Components are the major building block of any Angular 2 application. They're a type of directive and replace controllers from Angular 1X. I should mention too, though, that 1.5 and 1.6 Angular also use components. So the example of the component file structure I created using the Angular CLI, and I did that all from the command line, and I didn't have to create these files individually. So that's a great performance improvement. So with components, passing information into a component or out of component is easy. There's no more worrying about isolated scopes. To declare an input, you declare a property in your class with the syntax add input. To declare an output parameter, you use the at output syntax along with the event emitter class to allow other classes to register for component events. And this is important for passing information around if you have multiple components on one view. So moving next to the component lifecycle. And again here, Angular 1.5 and 1.6 are starting to make use of this lifecycle. And I've listed out here an example class, and I've included a constructor. Constructors are not part of the Angular lifecycle hooks, but they are in the lifecycle process, and you should limit the logic in the constructor. The ng on init is where most of your init logic should reside. And this initializes the directive component after Angular first displays the data-bound properties and sets the directive component's input properties. OnChanges is a method where it detects changes in the input properties of when components are fired. And this is very important when you have multiple components on one view that you're essentially updating a parent and child component by passing out around these input parameters. The OnChanges method fires, it detects any change, or I'm sorry, just mentioned that, but on the destroy, cleanup just before Angular destroys the directive component, you put your logic in for that. The doCheck lifecycle hook is to detect changes that Angular doesn't catch. And there are other lifecycle hooks, and I would check out the documentation for that. And then finally with component and the component markup, you can either do that inline or through an external file, and I've provided 2 examples of that. Styling in Angular has changed where each component can be styled by themselves or using global styles. Each component styles can be unique to the component, not conflict with global styles using scope styles. This provides a modular design. And that ends the high-level component review. We'll now move on to reactive programming with RxJS. So Angular 2 uses RxJS observables in 2 different ways for their internal implementation for its core logic. And it's also used in its public API with forms and H2P model. There are other libraries that you can use for reactive programming. It's not specific with Angular, for example, like Bacon.js. And the way this reactive programming works is it likes to work with event streams instead of individual events. And there's a lot of great information about reactive programming, and we suggest you get familiar with the core concepts. If you haven't worked with reactive programming before, you will likely get your first exposure to it working with the HTTP client in Angular 2. Observables are used by the HTTP client when performing asynchronous actions instead of promises. So I put together a slide just to give you an example service and component and their structure and how they're designed. If you're familiar with Angular 1x, you should be familiar with the HTTP provider. In Angular 2, this has been updated the HTTP client and makes use of observables for asynchronous activity. On this slide, you'll see the example Angular 2 service and Angular 2 components. The service has a get voter method that calls a get method to return an observable, which is a type of a voter class array. In the Angular 2 component, there's a get voters function that makes use of the voter service to get votes. Since the voter service get voters method returns an observable, we subscribe to it, and you can see that on the slide to get our voter data. And you might be used to seeing promises here because of working with Angular 1x. Observables are similar to promises except for some key differences that we'll review in the next slide. So observables can define both the setup and teardown aspects of asynchronous behavior. Essentially, you subscribe and unscribe to a producer of data. And observables are cancelable where promises are not. And observables can be retried, for example, calling a web service and having a timeout issue and retrying that call. Promises, you can't do that as easily. In addition, promises are natively supported in most modern browsers, and you should know that observables are not and require a library like RxJS. So moving on to TypeScript. So TypeScript provides class and module support, static type checking, ES6 feature support. It's well documented and supported. There's a website for that you can go out and check. The syntax similarity to backend languages like .NET and Java. If you're familiar with those languages, it's pretty easy to get accustomed to TypeScript. It's also a superset of JavaScript. So I mentioned one of the key benefits is application or render application separation. And so in Angular 2 splits this application logic from the render logic. In Angular 1, what would happen is that you would render the view into the browser, and then Angular 1 enhanced the DOM after it was loaded. And they switched that to actually having the application, or separating the application logic from the rendered logic to allow for cross-platform development and a separation of concerns. The render logic could be used in the render in the browser or used other render logic engines to write native code. This is a pretty significant change and improvement from Angular 1. So with cross-platform development, applications can be developed using native code across platforms. Some of the technologies that Angular 2 works well are with Ionic, Electron, NativeScript, and even Reactive Native. And really the rendering change mentioned before really opened this up to allow just an easier capability of doing cross-platform development. And I wanted to show kind of all the commands that you can do with Angular CLI. And again, it provides some tasks available from the command line. Things like simplifying or bundling many common tasks, like creating a new project, component, or service can be done on the command line. It allows for built-in environmental awareness when making application builds, for example, like QA, prod, environmental variables. And so here's a big list of commands available from the Angular CLI. It's not a complete list, but it does include quite a bit of commands that are often used. And finally, on the performance enhancements, code splitting is essential for large applications with only loading the required code to display a view, and application performance is much faster. This does require for you to set up your code and architecture to support it. Ahead of time compilation provides the ability to pre-compile an Angular application before it's consumed. This feature means that applications no longer rendered on the client in a just-in-time compilation, but instead are rendered on the server and makes your app much smaller to download. The universal initial load is the ability to use isomorphic rendering to render the first view of the application using a server-side technology, either that being .NET, Node, PHP, or Java. It makes load times much faster and helps with SEO. Before moving on to the next session, I just wanted to remind you that there are more changes with Angular 2, and we suggest you review the Angular website for more information. Now let's move on to discussing the migration path to Angular 2 from Angular 1X with Jen. So I'll go ahead and move that over.
Hello, I'm Jen, and I'm going to talk about the different migration paths and options, pros and cons when upgrading to Angular 2, and the different paths for the different versions for upgrading when thinking about upgrading to version 2. And then what to consider when you're trying to decide, do I even need to upgrade Angular? And then I'll go over what's next for Angular and what's the future of it. So if I do upgrade, is what's in store for me next. So with that, the migration options. Basically, you have two options, and they're both very manual options when upgrading from any 1.x to 2 version. You can either rebuild the entire application or rebuild incrementally. So what are the pros and cons to that? Let's see. So if we're rebuilding incrementally, some of the pros to doing it incrementally is that you can keep your application running, and you can, with the use of the ngUpgrade module, which is Teo will talk about later, but is part of the release Angular 2.2, you can actually add new features in Angular 2 and run Angular 2 and 1.x or 5, because you have to upgrade to 5 to get to be compatible. You can add new features along with your already running 1.x version. So you can add a feature, you can convert a feature, you could add a feature, you can convert a feature. You most likely wouldn't need a code freeze because you can keep adding new features while you're upgrading to 2. You wouldn't have to upgrade any of the old stuff that you didn't necessarily need to upgrade. The previous tests that you have written, because everybody knows that all developers write a ton of tests, they would be able to be used to determine the success of your rewrite. The cons to this is it is time intensive, and most likely you're going to be running a hybrid application for a period of time. And if that's okay with you, then this is an okay way to go. And as I mentioned earlier, the ngUpgrade is only compatible to 1.5. So if you want to do the rebuild incrementally, if you're at 1.2, 1.3, or 1.4, you would have to upgrade to 1.5 first. So what if you decided you wanted to rebuild big bang-wise with Angular 2? The pros to that, it's a clean conversion. You're not going to have the hybrid application. It's pure Angular 2 application. You get to use the Angular CLI tool right off the bat, which provides you your scaffolding and running unit tests, building, and whatnot, and all those commands that Travis showed earlier. Again, the cons, it's time intensive. You most likely want to put on a code freeze because you're not going to want to, or you may not want to introduce new features while you're trying to rebuild existing stuff into the new architecture. And this, with any rewrite, you're going to potentially introduce new problems and new bugs that you had previously not encountered. So that is always problematic. Now that you know the two different ways to upgrade, like I said, with the different versions, if you're at 1.2, 1.3, or 1.4, in order to do the incremental upgrade, you'll need to upgrade to 1.5 or 1.6 first. And Theo will talk about that with the ngUpgrade. If you're at 1.5 or 1.6 to upgrade to 2.0, is going to be the simplest migration path. The Angular 1.5 introduced a lot of things. They were preparing you for the 2 upgrade. So they introduced things. It encouraged the Angular 2 style folder structure. It brought in the component APIs. And then Angular 2.2 actually incorporated the ngUpgrade. So with that, what do I need to consider when I'm trying to decide which way to upgrade and if I do need to upgrade? Well, one of the questions you might want to ask is, am I going to get any training before the 2.0 migration? If you're not going to get any training, you might want to consider to learn as you go with the incremental upgrade, or big bang and do a POC. So that's one of the questions you might want to ask. Another one is, what version am I really running? Like I said, if you're 1.4 and below, you're going to have to do 2 incremental upgrades, 1 to 1.5 and then 2. So you might want to do just the big bang and rewrite the whole thing, depending on that. Now, is your app complex? Is it big? Is it small? That's another question you'll want to ask. I know my first Angular project was small, so I might think at this point, hey, we'll just do an incremental or a big bang and rewrite it just because it's small. The other reason, my first application, I would want to go with a big bang approach is because of the folder structure. If your folder structure is done by function, which is what mine was, where your directives are together, your controllers are together, your services are together, then you probably want to go with a big bang approach, because the new Angular 2 standard is to do your folder structure more by feature. And so you'll want to consider that when trying to decide which direction do I go. The other question is, do I mind running a hybrid application? If you're okay with running Angular 1 and 2 side by side in one app, then doing the incremental upgrade might be the way to go for you. And then again, there's testing. As I said, all of us developers write tons of tests. So if you have written really good tests, what you'll want to do is the incremental upgrade possibly, because then you can take use of all those tests that have already been written. And then there's application retirement. I mean, is your application going to actually retire in the next few years? Because if it is, maybe you don't want to upgrade at all, because 1.x versions will be supported for a period of time. They said that they weren't going to just stop supporting it, because most people are using it. So you do have a bit of time to use that 1.x version. But the Angular team does encourage you to upgrade if your application is going to keep going. And then what would Google do? So in a presentation I watched by Igor Minar, he stated that actually Google took the big bang approach to almost every application that they had written. So that's what Google would do. They rewrote everything from scratch. So now that you know and have the questions, you're thinking, what is Angular going to do to us next? Well, they know that Angular 2 was a pain and is going to be a pain to upgrade to. So first off, they're going with, this is just Angular. No more AngularJS, no more Angular 2.0, just Angular. One of the reasons is no more JS is because now it's done in TypeScript, as Travis said. And the Angular team really wants to progress the Angular framework and reduce confusion. So if it's just Angular, then you'll know you're just on Angular. And in the next few slides, I'll show you why. So Angular team is actually going to adopt semantic versioning, or SEMVAR, as us developers like to shorten everything. And what does this mean? SEMVAR is putting version numbers and meaning to those version numbers. So the first number in version number is a major version, and this means that they're potentially breaking changes. The Angular team has stated that they are going to try as hard as they can not to make breaking changes, but they know that's impossible. So if they want to keep going forward, you're going to have versions where there's breaking changes. So that's what the first version number is. The second version number is a minor version, which means there's going to be new features, but no breaking changes. So you can upgrade within the major version without having to worry about any breaking changes. You'll just get blessed with new versions. Now the third number means a patch or a bug fix. Again, no breaking changes. So that's really nice because they knew it was painful when they converted everything in a new architecture for the 2.0. So they're trying to avoid that in the future. So what does this mean? Well, Angular has said that what they're planning on doing is they're going to release a patch version every week, a minor version every month, and a major version every 6 months. And this is so that you can plan and they can be predictable and steady. So what does this mean? This means that you can plan for those breaking changes if there is going to be breaking changes. And they're planning on being as transparent as possible when those versions come out on what's going to change. And they have been so far. So as you see, we start with the next major release, Angular 4 in March 2017. And then you're thinking, what happened to 3, right? So in the same presentation that I watched, Igor said that what happened was they made a mistake when versioning, and so their Angular router package was actually already at 3. So they couldn't, their versioning was off with that. He didn't elaborate on what happened, but we all know stuff happens. So what they decided to do was skip over 3. So we're going straight to 4, and that comes out next month, March 2017. And then, as they said, they're going to try to release a major version every 6 months. You'll know that September, October 2017, Angular 5. Angular 6 is the next March, and Angular 7 will be the September, October from there on. And again, this is so that you can prepare, your company can prepare for all those changes that will be coming in and put it into your schedule to upgrade. So now that you have all the paths and options, I will turn it over to Teo, and she can tell you what tools might be available for this migration process.
Hello, my name is Tyo. So Jen talked about the different migration paths on how to upgrade your Angular 1 application. And I'm going to talk about what tools are actually available to use. And this, of course, will depend on the Angular 1 version you're upgrading from. So before Angular 2 was finalized, when it was still in beta version, there were 2 tools that were released to help with the migration. One was ngForward, and the other was Metadata. This was released by the community, not by the Angular core team, but they had the blessings of the Angular team. After Angular 2 became final, Angular team itself released a tool called ngUpgrade, which is, of course, the preferred tool to use, but then it depends on what version you're upgrading from. So this shows the different versions and what tools are available. So if you're going to upgrade from 1.3, the only tool available for the upgrade was actually ngForward, and this allows you to upgrade to 1.5. If you're going to upgrade from 1.4, we have the Metadata available, and it also helps upgrade to 1.5. And we'll see shortly why it's actually preferable to upgrade a lower version up to 1.5 before the upgrade to 2.0. So let's talk a bit about the ngForward tool. So what this did was it actually helped you prepare your Angular 1 code to look like Angular 2. So you're not actually writing Angular 2 code, but the whole goal was to make it look like Angular 2 to prepare your code for eventual migration to Angular 2. So As I mentioned earlier, this was created by the community before Angular 2 was finalized, and it's actually no longer under active development and no longer maintained. But if you need to upgrade from 1.3, this might be the tool that is available to you. So what are some of the pros of using the ng forward? It's quick to use. All you had to do was to wrap your Angular 1 code in components, which closely mirrors the Angular 2 version. And then by doing this, you get used to the Angular 2 syntax. If you haven't used it before, this is kind of like a gradual introduction to Angular 2. And it's best used if you're not going to update to Angular anytime soon. As I said, it's no longer actively maintained, so you want to be mindful of that if you need to upgrade using this tool. And it adds system JS configuration to your project. The cons include it's not a complete upgrade solution. You only upgrade to 1.5. You still need to use another tool to upgrade from 1.5 to Angular 2. And there is no direct upgrade from 1.3 to 2, short of rewriting your whole code. As I mentioned, it's no longer under active development. It can only be used for version 1.3 and above. You have no ES5 support. And then your application can get bulky because you have to kind of rewrite and rewrap a lot of it into components, so they might just end up in a lot of extra lines of code. And it might be a little confusing when you eventually upgrade to Angular 2, because even though the syntax is similar, the bulk of the code is still Angular 1 code under the hood. So we'll talk about the ng Metadata, which is a tool that was released to help upgrade from Angular 1.4 version to Angular 1.5. So similar to ng forward, this helps you wrap your Angular 1 code in TypeScript decorators to give the appearance of Angular 2 code. This helps, of course, to eventually, gradually adopt your code to Angular 2 version. The pros include it helps to update code base to TypeScript, as I mentioned. It's pure Angular 1 API. It supports Angular 1 API and most of Angular 2. So it doesn't still support all the Angular 2 API. For instance, it doesn't support the provider's array in components decorator. So they all have, it still has limitations, but it's the closest you can get to upgrade, from 1.5 to 1.4 to 1.5. You can use it in conjunction with ngUpgrade when you eventually decide to migrate your code to 2.0. You have an ng party Slack channel, which can help with issues and communication that you might face when trying to upgrade your application. The cons include it's not a complete upgrade solution. It's only available to use from Angular 1.4. It's a mixture of Angular 1 and 2 code, so it's sort of like a hybrid application, trying to use both of them side by side, and still not all Angular 2 features are supported. So migration after Angular 2. After Angular 2 became final, we now have a tool to use, the ngUpgrade, which was released by the Angular team. And it's a lot easier if you have previously upgraded your 1.3 or 1.4 code to 1.5. It's a lot easier to upgrade directly to 2.0 because the syntax is very similar, and 1.5 supports the component API. And then the cons are still that it's still not a complete upgrade solution, because even though you've gotten your application up to 1.5, you can ngUpgrade, you still need to rewrite it to 2.0. So how is ngUpgrade used? If you need to upgrade a large or complex application, it's a lot easier to run both frameworks side by side, so Angular 1 and Angular 2 side by side, and then kind of gradually port over the Angular 1 component to Angular 2. So ngUpgrade is actually the ideal tool for this because running both together will actually help upgrade your application without disrupting your business, and that way the work can be done collaboratively and over a period of time. So pros, this is part of the official migration path under the Angular tool. You can be sure it's stable and it works. It has a comprehensive documentation if you run into any issues. It helps with incremental upgrade, like I mentioned. That way, the disruption to your business is minimal, and it works with ES5 and ES6. It's still a bit time intensive because you have to consider trying to run two hybrid applications together and then eventually trying to port it to Angular 2. So there's still some time constraint involved in doing that, mixing both Angular 1 and 2 code. It's easiest when you use Angular 1.5 because that already supports the component API. So it will be difficult to use ngUpgrade for a version that is less than 1.5 because of components being used. And it's still only considered a complete upgrade if all parts of the Angular 1 code has been finally converted to Angular 2. So here I have an example of an Index.html with using Angular 1.5 and then a hybrid Angular 2 HTML, Index.html page as well. So as you can see from the difference, the Angular 1.5 is familiar with that. It uses ngApp and script tags to bootstrap the application. But for the Angular 2 hybrid application, the bootstrapping is actually done somewhere else, which I'll show in the next slide. And you have addition of Angular polyfill, system.js configuration, and system import itself to load the application. For an Angular 2 application, the entry point is no longer ngApp. It's actually called main.ts. So this removes the ng attribute from index. The bootstrap is done by this file, but it's actually configured in system config.js file. And the app is bootstrapped using the upgrade module. So ngUpgrade uses the module concept from Angular 2, which is different from 1.5. If you're familiar with 1.5, you see that you just add the assets to the modules. But when using Angular 2, you actually have to create a class decorated with the engine module decorator, and then that also describes all the Angular assets in the metadata. For components, and the hybrid Angular 2 app also works slightly different. You have to create a class. In Angular 2, components are created as classes. So rather than just declare your component, you have to create it as a class. But then the application is the component is eventually plugged into the Angular 1 application. For services in Angular 1, you make use of the ng resource. And you can also, in Angular 1, you can use a factory or service to get the data. But in Angular 2, it's actually used, the services are actually used. Factories are no longer used. And the service is created using a TypeScript class and also decorated with the injectable. We use a method of ngUpgrade called downgrade injectable to make the Angular 2 service available in Angular 1. So even though both frameworks are running together side by side, to use from Angular 1 to Angular 2, the component or service has to be upgraded. And the reverse is the case. To use from Angular 2 to Angular 1, you have to downgrade the component or service that has to be used. So just a quick recap of why do you have to upgrade in the first place. We have speed and performance. Angular 2 is a lot faster. The performance is a lot more stable. We have a modern architecture using ES6 and TypeScript. DOM separation and server-side rendering. It's a lot faster since it renders from the server. And also there's also mobile development support built straight into Angular 2. And again, this is just a quick recap of how to upgrade. So if the application is small or it's a newer application, it might just make more sense to rewrite or refactor your application from version 1 straight into version 2. If it's a larger or complex application, you might have to do this incrementally. So from 1.3, you have to upgrade to 1.5 using ngForward. From 1.4 to 1.5 using ngMetadata. And then once your application is in version 1.5, the ngUpgrade will help you to fully upgrade into Angular 2 version. So now I'm going to pass this back over to Travis for the conclusion.
Thanks, Teo. So we've covered a few topics today regarding an upgrade from Angular 1X to Angular 2 or just Angular now. As you're now aware, there are some impressive improvements with the Angular framework that can be leveraged in your application development. And we've examined the migration paths from Angular 1X, whether it be 1.2, 1.3, 1.4, 1.5, to Angular, just Angular 2, and reviewed some of the tools that are available to aid in this migration process. We want to thank you for attending this webinar and really appreciate your time. Before moving to the questions and answers, I just want to let you know that this webinar will be available on our website for your review along with the references we used when creating the presentation. You'll also get a link to get a download version of this presentation in PDF format. So let's go ahead and move on to the question and answer section of the webinar. So check. All right, so first question we had is what can we do today to prepare ourselves for migration? So we would say best practices, build your application using components and services in Angular 1, like 1.5 and 1.6 are already doing. It's also described in the AngularJS style guide. You're going to want to stop using scope and start using controller as syntax that was introduced in 1.2. And then also look around for the training that's out there. There's a free ebook on Angular 2 that you can download and review, along with going to Pluralsight or Udemy. All right. Another question, how do I decide on whether to migrate now or wait until the next version? If your application is older than 1.5, it's probably a good idea to go ahead and upgrade it to 1.5. And then use the ngUpgrade to gradually write Angular 2 code alongside with the 1.5 version until everything's migrated. If your application is less complex and already needs to be refactored, then go for a straight rewrite like what Google's doing with their code base. And it really ultimately depends on the complexity of your application and where you are at with your business requirements. Okay, I don't see any other questions. Just checking again to make sure. Looks like we're good to go. So again, thanks for attending the webinar. And if you have any questions, please reach out to either myself, Jen, or Teo. Great. You can find us on LinkedIn or Twitter. And again, appreciate your time. Thanks.